The fundamental reason why Congress is dysfunctional is that they're poorly socialized. All the members act like snotty 3-year-olds. And in fact, the biggest danger is that the poor socialization is actually rewarded. The worse you act, the more TV airtime you get, the more fundraising you get, the more notoriety you get. So instead of inhibiting people for acting like jackasses, they're actually supported. If you want to have a better level of government, that needs to be changed. There needs to be some discipline and some accountability brought into play. There needs to be a combination of both collective and individual punishment. The first starting point would have to be to divide Congress into fifths, eliminating majorities. The simple fact is that if you have a majority, negotiation ends. As soon as one group has more than 50%, if they vote as a bloc, there's no possibility for negotiation. If you divide them into fifths, there's constant room for negotiations. With a majority-minority system, there's only one way to achieve a majority if they vote as a bloc. If you divide into fifths, there are 10 different combinations, assuming each group votes as a bloc. That produces negotiation, that produces more fluidity, and that produces a more efficient and more competent level of government. If one group, such as the Tea Party, refused to participate in negotiations, the remaining 4 groups would still have 4 different ways of achieving a majority, and so they could just be ignored. Beyond the dividing into fifths, the second thing is you need to force the members of Congress to stab each other in the back, to give each other a rating of 0 to 10. And then you need to have relegation. You need to have a cutoff line below which they are denied privileges. Their pay would be reduced by maybe 20%. Their office staffs would be reduced by 50%. They would lose all committee assignments. They would lose all the ability to participate in floor debates, to offer amendments, to offer any legislation. They could only vote up and down on final legislation. That produces an inhibition in their behavior. And hopefully, when the election comes along, if they're that useless and they can't do anything, they'll get thrown out of office. The means of choosing the cutoff point is more complicated. One can use a basic statistical formula known as the standard deviation. If you cut off anyone below a standard deviation, assuming it was a fairly random distribution, about 1/6 of the members would be denied access. If you go to 2 deviations, it would be at 3%. It might be better, however, if you allow people to rate the entire Congress, to rate the House and the Senate, to force a different voting. So for instance, let's say 50% was guaranteed to be allowed to participate, and the other 50% were based upon a voting. If you ask people on a scale of 0 to 10, where do they think Congress is? If they say 4 on average, of the 50% that's competitive, that 4 will be converted into 0.4, it will be 20%. So 50% will be guaranteed, plus 20% would give you 70% of the members of Congress, 30% would be excluded. That's collective punishment. That means that if they act like jackasses, the people as a whole will punish them. And more of them will be relegated and will be useless. More and more of them will be useless, and that will hurt their feelings, make them feel bad, and hopefully get them thrown out of office. The way of rating people is difficult. One obvious method is to use polling. Nobody really likes polls, but it's probably the best way of doing it. If you try to do the standard polling uses adjustments, which is problematic because you never know if people are lying when they report the various categories for adjustment. So you might just have to take a bigger sample of 5,000 or 10,000 voters called at random, and then use that to decide how badly to punish Congress. That would force better behavior. Committee membership would be decided by the highest rated members of each of the 5 groups. The membership in a committee would be decided by the highest rated people getting first choice. So in each group, the highest rated people would be the ones who choose which committees they are on. The lower rated people would get whatever is left. On each committee, whoever is the highest rated member would be the chair of that committee, although there'd be a rule that perhaps no one can be the chair of more than one committee. Members of the committee would be multiples of 5 people. If any of the groups had an overly large number of useless people, they would have fewer people on certain committees. That would be an additional punishment against being stupid. Each group would have the ability to expel any member by a majority vote, which would force them to act well within the group as well. The person in charge of the day-to-day operation of the House and the Senate, such as the Speaker, would be the highest rated member in that chamber. There would be a change from time to time, but that's not a bad thing in a democracy. The voting and the rating would occur on a yearly basis, and that would cause a constant overturning and a constant improvement in behavior.